Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, Kensho, and with me as always are Tiffany Liu and William White. This week we'll start with an unfinished segment in which we revisit some of our recent topics, then we'll discuss the Chicago Symphony's upcoming fall season, and finally we'll review a new violin concerto by John Williams. But first, we like to start with our prelude segment. So, Tiffany, what do we have today?
This week, we'll be playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Back to the Future, aka Retrogradus ad Parnassum. Johann Sebastian Bach was famous for his crab canons, musical compositions that could be played forwards and backwards. But even he might have had a tough time with this one. Here's how it works. I have prepared 30-second excerpts from well-known classical pieces with the audio reversed, and it will be up to my co-hosts to discern what piece is being played. This is a competitive buzzer game, so the first person to buzz in will get a chance to answer. If they get it right, they'll win points equivalent to the remainder of the time in the excerpt, i.e. they buzz in with a correct answer after 5 seconds, they'll get 25 points. And if they answer incorrectly, they lose the points and the other player gets the option of answering or continuing to listen to the excerpt. Okay, ready to get into it, guys?
Yeah.
Hold on, you just cut the cord on Will's buzzer here. Just 1 second. Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
Buzz.
Modest
Mussorgsky, A Night on Bald Mountain.
All right, good. That was Will in at, let's say, 28.
So that was 2 seconds, so I got 28 points.
All right. That's how we're going to play it. We're going to play it. All right. Here we go.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, buzz.
All right. There were like 4 seconds left in that excerpt, so.
It's just screen printing Will's face right now. Just 1 second. Perfect.
I think it's Mercury from the Planets, Gustav Holst.
Yeah, good, Will.
Yes! It really threw me off, that high, stratospheric pitch, but then I realized it's backwards glockenspiel. Going ding, 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 ding.
Okay, so I think there were like 4 seconds left in that excerpt, so.
All right. So I'm on
But
board
that eliminates the chance that I can win this game now.
Why? I only
Does
have
it?
32.
I have 5 excerpts.
There's 5 excerpts.
Oh, there's 5. Only 3. Okay, I thought we
Yeah.
had 3.
Okay, let me cue the next one up.
Is it a violin concerto?
No.
I
mean, now
I
that
have no
we've run out
idea.
of time on it, I'm happy
Yeah,
to
it
doesn't
give
really
you
matter.
hints. It's a string quartet.
Oh.
And I can play a different section that I think might be more. Let me see if I can find the section of it that I think will be more Well, I mean,
Trying to
it should all
turn
be
this
recognizable.
upside down in my mind. Backwards.
Oh, okay, here's an easier part to turn backwards around.
Oh, it's Death and the Maiden.
Yeah, that's right. It's the theme and variations, Death and the Maiden. Yeah.
That one's tricky.
That Kensho, I was exactly where you were. I had no idea that was a string quartet.
I thought it was either a string quartet or concerto, but I leaned toward concerto.
I thought it was a
Oh.
Baroque violin concerto. That was kind of
That's
my guess.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
No
Okay.
points.
No points awarded.
All right, I
We'll
gotta get my
still-
act together here, folks.
Here with
2 rounds
32
left,
points.
no points. Let's go.
Okay.
Buzz. Is there any time?
Nope.
So this is just for bragging rights.
Oh, I know what it is now.
Do you want to say?
It's Mahler 1, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I'm
Yeah.
scared so.
Second movement. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Last one.
Buzz.
Yeah.
It's Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Right? No?
No.
It's not. Okay.
So now I get to try.
Do you want to
answer
steal it, or do you want to keep
I
on
want to
listening?
steal at this. It's
Okay.
it is Tchaikovsky. It is a ballet, and it's Sleeping Beauty.
Also no.
Dee-da, doo-da-dee-da.
Yeah?
It's the Waltz of the Flowers.
Of course.
From the Nutcracker.
Of course.
Well, Will wins this again with
32
points, I believe. That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment. But before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds. So we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes, where you'll find a link to the form where you can upload a 30-second unidentified clip of classical music for us to try to identify. And with that, we move on to our first topic. Will, what do you have for us?
Each week on the Gabfest, we bring you stories from the world of classical music, and we wrap them up into neat little packages of 10 to 15 minutes. But as you can imagine, there's often more to say, or threads to follow up on, or parts of our discussion that got left on the cutting room floor. With that in mind, today we've got one of our unfinished segments in which we follow up and flesh out some of our earlier discussions. All right, so starting off with Tiffany, we've got something that follows up on our very first episode.
So, we have made much on this podcast about the mysterious nature of Beethoven's metronome markings, which we generally know in the field to be faster than what is conventionally taken in performance.
But not twice as fast.
But
God
not
damn
twice
it.
as
Well,
fast.
or unless you think that all of the performances of Beethoven music are twice too fast.
Kill me now.
That's right.
We're not doing this again.
That was
Please.
last time. Don't worry, we buried that hatchet. But
Have
here's a
we?
new theory.
Oh no, I think it's very much an
Have
open
we-
question.
Are we here, really?
Back to the present day, thanks guys. So here's a new theory that arose, and that is that Beethoven didn't know how to read his metronome.
Oh my god, no, come on, please.
I actually think this holds quite a bit more water than the double metronome mark theory, but here's the basic of it. You know, in these pendulum metronomes, you have a doodad that you slide up and down the shaft in order to
Kind of like a grandfather cock.
set the tempo. Exactly.
Oh, God. So
And this
much to cover.
doodad has generally a trapezoidal shape that has a top and a bottom. Well, you can align either the top or the bottom with the metronome marking that you want. And so the theory is that he was aligning the wrong side of this trapezoid to the metronome marking. He was aligning the bottom side to the number rather than the top side of this. And so those of you who know what one of these old-fashioned metronomes look like, I called it pendulum. Really, it's more like a reverse pendulum, right? Where the doodad is above the
It's a fulcrum.
fulcrum. Thank you, Bill. Anyway, so that's the theory, is that he was just like reading the metronome wrong and aligning the wrong side of the marking device. Which, I mean, you know, if we think about the fact that his metronome markings are generally off by, I don't know, 10 or 15 clicks.
Yeah.
Right, like
right.
how wide was that trapezoid thing?
Well, I think it would be about the equivalent of 3 clicks. So, because the metronome is sort of a quasi-logarithmic scale. You know, first it goes up by 1, and then by 2, and then by 3, and then by 4. Yeah, I think in like a sort of moderato tempo it would be about 12 BPM off. And I guess we should say that this whole instantiation of the Beethoven question comes from 2 scholars, Almudena Martin Castro and Iñaki Usar, who I guess are both scholars in Spain. They're working at the University of Madrid.
But as with all research these days, I found out about it on Twitter. Well, make of that what you will, listeners. Let's go to our next unfinished topic. Kensho?
All right, so we took a wonderful quiz how long was that, guys? What was that, 36? Episode 36.
I just remember we got a surprising number of those wrong.
Right, so we took this quiz that was basically, is this piece of information from Beyonce's biography or from Mozart's biography? So is it Beyonce or is it Mozart? And one of the questions was, which artist had a pet snake? And Will casually just inquired whether or not they even have snakes in the Alps in Europe.
Right. I thought that Beyonce was the much likelier answer to that question if either of them were to do it, because it's like, do they have snakes, even have them in the Alps where he would have grown up?
And we here at the Gapfest are now very happy to report that there are snakes in the Alps. And Will, you send us this site that's titled Europe's Most Venomous Snakes. And which species of venomous snakes lives in the Alps?
I don't know. If I do a page search for Alps, nothing comes up here. But
we've thoroughly researched this fact-finding mission here. Well, also, I love that we brought this up because one of the questions was also like, which artist has a frog named after them, or what was it?
Mm-hmm.
So we're already in this kind of amphibious reptilian world.
That's right.
Well, we care so much about this, but apparently there are snakes in Europe or in the Swiss Alps.
Yeah, not in Ireland, though, of course, because St. Patrick threw them all out.
Next!
All right, well, the next follow-up bit here is, of course, about our favorite institution to cover, the New York Metropolitan Opera, which we have covered extensively on Episode 5, Episode 14, Episode 20, and in our last unfinished segment on Episode 33. So the updates now are a few. One is that the Met has reached a union deal with its stagehands. That was in the beginning of May. Then there is a question still of whether they will reach a deal with their orchestral and choral musicians. I believe that they have reached a deal with the choir, and they're still working on one with the orchestra. Now, some other strange things that have come up are that Fabio Luisi, the music director of the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, invited 50 Met orchestra musicians down to perform with the Dallas Symphony, gave them a week's worth of pay, and in order to try to monetize this experience even more, they are releasing elements of this performance as NFTs, non-fungible tokens, for all of you Slate Money listeners out there. So these are like a video of one movement of a Mahler symphony, and there's only 100 copies, and you have to pay $1,000 to get the video. It's sort of like a limited print run. Probably you've come across the idea of these NFTs in the public conversation. But there are people in classical music trying to get into this. If anybody is what's that app that you got us on, Kensho?
Clubhouse?
Yeah, if anybody out there is a Clubhouse member, the only conversation on Clubhouse is basically about getting NFTs into the world of classical music. So that would be a great place to find this kind of information.
We should probably invite someone to talk to us about that. I mean, it's interesting. I don't understand how they can only allow, whatever. How many video? How do you limit the use or the ownership of a video? especially in this age?
Yeah, great question. And I don't really care to know the answer, quite honestly. I think it's all pretty silly. Okay, and then one final little bit here is that the Met, along with a number of Broadway theaters and I believe the New York City Ballet, I might be wrong about that, they're announcing their reopening rules with regards to COVID. And at the Met, only vaccinated patrons are going to be able to go and see performances there. And that means that no children under 12 are going to be allowed into the hall. I wonder what do you guys think about that?
I mean, isn't that just more of a state of how the vaccines are just not available to these kids than the Met wanting, or like any New York, performing arts institutions not wanting kids?
Well, of course. Of course they want kids.
In a few months, vaccinations will be available for these people, and then they'll be able to come. Yes?
Yeah. But I mean, not every institution is doing this. I mean, like, for example, my organization, we're having these, torturous circular discussions about what our COVID precautions should be. And we're going to have an across-the-board vaccine mandate for all of our musicians and staff and audience. But we haven't gone so far as to saying that means that children under 12 can't come to the concerts. Because, for example, like, if we have musicians who, they don't want to get a babysitter, like their kid wants to come see the concert and the kid is like accompanied by their parent and is willing to wear a mask. It's just like, who are we really to tell them the kid can't be there if they're in a mask? I mean, they're at a lower level of danger for getting sick from the virus and I believe acquiring and transmitting the virus. And that's not to say that they can't. We all know that it has been proven that younger children can, but I don't know. I just feel like
it's too draconian.
It's. I understand why you would make this decision. I'm not knocking it at all, and it's something that we considered. But I was just wondering if you guys had any thoughts.
Well, it's also New York, and New York completely shut down, right? There was just absolutely no prospect at all of any performances happening during the outset of the pandemic, where other cities have tried to at least do something. So it doesn't surprise me that they're being very harsh with this as well.
Well, very cautious at least.
Well, and also there's a certain cost benefit. I mean, like how many children underneath 12 are attending the Met anyway?
Right.
Exactly. What is your loss? What is the chances that you are going to alienate even 5 or 10, frankly, people who are going to be upset that they had to find a babysitter one night because of this policy? And is that not worth being able to publicly say, we are taking this very, very seriously, no exceptions? Yeah. As an institution, that kind of the ability to say something so complete is rare, without qualification. Right. So it's probably, I mean, I'm sure that in their cost benefit analysis, when they collect their statistics on their audience, they're probably doing this right.
All right. So next, Tiffany, I think that we have some exciting news about a friend of the show here.
In our Thanksgiving episode last year, episode number 13, we had a series of American composers as guests on the show, and the one I interviewed was a composer named Jarod Impichchaachaaha Tate. And he has now, we're happy to congratulate him on being appointed by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs American Music Abroad program as one of 31 cultural ambassadors for the U.S. Department of State, which is, pretty exciting stuff, actually. What do you guys think?
I think it's great, and I've seen some other good news from Jarod's neck of the woods. I think that he's having some big performances coming up this season, maybe one by the San Francisco Symphony.
Yeah, so to remind our listeners, Jarod Tate is a representative of the Chickasaw Nation and has made his career on incorporating what he calls Chickasaw and broadly Native American, what he called totems, into his music in quite the integrated way, I would say. So it's cool to see his work being recognized on the broader, in fact, non-musical, like extra musical stage, which I think is the coolest part of this. So congratulations to Jarod Tate.
What is the platform that you received by being a U.S. cultural ambassador?
That's a great question, and I'm sure one that we should actually probably get Jarod back on the podcast to discuss, because I'm interested as well. But this is part of a broader program called American Music Abroad, which has programs every season. And so his appointment will take him on a, quote, month-long multi-country and this year virtual tour, in which he will engage with international audience through public concerts, interactive performances with local musicians, lectures and demonstrations, workshops, jam sessions, and media interviews. American Music Abroad activities focus on younger and underserved audiences in countries where people have fewer opportunities to meet American performers and experience their music firsthand. And this program, the AMA, American Music Abroad, has been funding bands to travel to over 100 countries around the world since 2011.
Very cool.
Cool. Okay, good stuff. Let's go to Kensho for our next topic.
All right, so this has ties to two discussions, primarily our discussion in episode 39 covering the menuhin competition, and a little sidetrack to also more Pinky-related issues. So there's a competition called the Izai International Competition, which Classic FM says is a very prestigious competition. I don't think I've ever heard of it.
Competition for violinists, is that right?
Yeah, I would imagine so. But a competitor in this competition has accused the competition. Well, first of all, let's say that the competition, much like the menuhin this year, is done completely online, where the entrants were submitting video recordings of their performances for the panel to watch and listen to, and then determine their winners. However, in this case, an entrant in the competition is accusing the competition of not watching their chamber music group's performance, and says that I guess they were submitting these videos over YouTube, and YouTube supplies the video's owner with analytics of how long people have watched, or how many times people have watched, or how long people have watched the videos. And when this competitor went in to look at the analytics of how, if their video has been watched, they found out that their submissions were only watched for 22 and 23 seconds, which they're saying is only 2% of the length of the piece that they performed. So clearly this kind of thing would never happen in a live competition where someone would be cut off in 22 seconds, but obviously...
No, in a live competition, the judges would only wish that they could stop it after 22 seconds. They wouldn't actually be able to do it. Yeah, good on these guys for using the back door and seeing what's going on in terms of, holding them accountable.
I wonder what the rules stated about how these videos were going to be watched. I mean, assuming that it is a prestigious competition, I can't imagine how many video submissions they had received. So if they were promising that they were going to watch every single second of every performance, this is not right.
But where in any competition thing would you have seen something like that? It's all about what you have to submit and not what they promise you in return.
Right, exactly, right.
Yeah, but that's a good point, that for an online competition, maybe there should be something in the fine print about that.
Well, you can bet from now on what they're going to do is play the video for themselves, go make dinner after the first 5 seconds and leave the video to play. I mean, this is not very hard to circumvent, frankly.
Right.
And I think, they're right to be upset about this. They're right to call it to attention. They might maybe even be right to expose it. The legal proceedings is a little bit much for me. I mean, you're seeking out, you're gonna sue a what do you think they're gonna do? Are they gonna refund your application fee? Ooh. And and now you've kind of created this. Why would anybody want to listen to your stuff after this? Frankly, let the clock run out. Fine. And it feels like, a well-intentioned letter of because of these metrics I can see, and then, you can go public with that information as well. I mean, that matters to these competitions. But I imagine that were I in their position, I would have written a letter to them and said, this feels disrespectful. I mean, how many job applications can you think of? How many test
which are
essays,
sorted by algorithms at this point.
How many job interviews? And that after the first 20 seconds, we know this. Well, that was my question for you guys, is we've all listened to many auditions. How long do you think you do need at least to be, because, when you're getting, it's like Tiffany said, when you're getting so many submissions, and your job is to separate the wheat from the chaff. You might not need more than 25 seconds. I mean, look at us. We can figure out a composer in 2 seconds. At the level that's sufficiently low enough, let's talk about, school auditions. You need less than 3 seconds. I mean it. That sounds, uncharitable, given especially the amount of material that you make your students go through for the beginning of the year seating audition. You want them to have prepared 3 excerpts and a solo and some whatever, but in reality, listening to all state tapes or like whatever it is, it takes maybe 5 seconds.
And that's like 5 seconds to determine if you want to listen more, or
That's
you've
right.
already seen it all. So it's not that we only listen to 5 seconds every time. It's
Right.
just that 5 seconds will determine whether or not you want to listen more, or you've heard enough, or
You
whatever.
do an
It's-
initial pass of like, okay, up or down or middle, and in that initial cut, if you've calibrated your expectations correctly, that initial opening window of how long you're going to listen is maybe 5 seconds.
I find that everyone that is in that kind of mode of auditions or job applications is always like shocked to hear this. Like even in like I've spoken to like conductors that are applying for grad schools or whatever, and they're submitting like 30-minute long videos of their conducting. I'm like, we're only gonna watch like 30 seconds, dude. Like please, And
Well, is it fair? Does that mean that we should only require 5 seconds of video?
No.
No, of course not.
It certainly means we should require less than what most places require. I mean, that
Yes.
is what Kensho, I think you and I give similar advice. I always tell people, I'm like, start in the middle of a phrase, start, 5 seconds from the end, put your best stuff at the beginning of your reel.
Yeah.
Because that is when you're making or breaking yourself.
Right. But again, like these competitions are not allowed. Like that's not what it is, right? You have to submit a full performance as if you're performing it live on stage or whatever. Yeah. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. The one big difference between a job application and this competition is that they charge these registration fees, right? So you're paying money, and this is the argument for the legal proceedings, is that they're saying, well, we're paying the panel's salary or whatever, which I'm sure is I don't know,
minimal.
for their time to listen to us. But 22 seconds, I mean, if we're talking we can determine yes, no, or maybe in 5 seconds, and that's already 4 times the amount that they were really owed, right? So I don't
that's being a bit.
I'm not going to talk about owing. I'm not saying it's morally right that I only listen to 10 seconds, but like, come on.
I'm being quite
facetious. Yes, I know.
Yes. Then this ties into again what we talked about with the Zuckerman discussion about just having these kind of preconceived notions of how someone plays based on how they look, and so when you're only devoting 20 seconds to something or 5 seconds to something, like if you are holding those kind of preconceived notions, it's going to affect how people advance or not in these competitions. Yeah. Whether or not these competitions really affect anybody's career at all, I think it's certainly something that people should be aware about. All right, so Will, you got another one. That's one of our last. Is this our last? Yeah. Oh, you have a great. Will, yes, finally, you have a big reveal for us actually today.
Yeah, that's right. It was on our Bastille Day episode, CGF number 45, when we were talking about the peculiar naming conventions of a lot of French early and contemporary music groups and orchestras and choruses. And I said that it's been something I'd been thinking about a lot because the group that I direct, which Tiffany can tell you what the name of the group that I direct is, right?
The Orchestra, Seattle and Seattle Chamber Singers.
Very good, yeah. OSSCS just rolls right off the tongue.
OSCS.
Yeah, that's the acronym there.
I always have trouble remembering where the "and" goes.
Yeah, nobody can remember where the S's go, how many there are, which ones of them stand for what, and how the whole thing comes together. But happy to say that we have revealed our new name now. We did a concert yesterday, and we did the big unveiling, and we've done a big rollout on social media and email today, and direct mail even. And the new name of my group is Harmonia.
Nice.
And, of course, the fact that it is a choir and orchestra together. It's a very harmonious blend of instruments and voices. And it's one of these things where it's like, there's no word for that. I mean, we could have called it like the Seattle Oratorio Society, but I can't imagine anything dustier than that. So no, we chose one name to rule it all. It's called Harmonia, and underscore is Harmonia, Orchestra, and Chorus.
So what was the process like for that? Did you hire somebody out for that, or is that something that was completely internal?
I'll tell you, it was a 2-year process. We had hired somebody who is a naming and branding specialist. She was excited about the project. She put a lot of work into it. She came up with a short list of, I think, 5 names, and we narrowed it down to 3. We asked for feedback from our stakeholders, our musicians, everybody involved. And read one way, the feedback information was very murky because there was no name that stood out. But read another way, the feedback was clear, which is to say there was no name that was the one. Well, this was all happening right in the lead up to the pandemic, and then we canceled everything. So we were going to do the big reveal at the end of last year's season. So when it became clear that we weren't going to be doing concerts for months on end, it was like, well, we're not going to do this now. And that actually gave us space. And in that space, we all kept thinking about it. And one of our board members had an epiphany. And so, I mean, as much as I admire and appreciate what our branding and naming consultant did, in the end, it was one of these eureka moments. And that's really what you hope for from something like this.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you so much.
And listeners, check out the website. You guys have, is this the same website with a different name or a different whole new website revamp?
It's the same website with certain new elements and tweaks and stuff. And we've announced we have a very optimistic season planned. I mean, we're planning a full main stage concert series. And as I mentioned, we're having full vaccination across the board. So, it's a bit of an audacious thing to plan for something like that, especially for concerts involving choir in Seattle, which, as we all know, was not far away from the site of a very bad COVID-related tragedy early in the pandemic. But we feel confident. We did a concert yesterday with voices and orchestra, and it seemed like a very good proof of concept that we can do it safely. So our fingers are crossed. And we'll have to. We're about to preview another group's season. We'll have to preview mine maybe in a future episode. But thanks guys. Thanks for your congratulations. It's been very well received, which has been really nice. And that just about does it for this edition of our unfinished segment.
No, we have missed one very important update for everyone, right?
What would that be?
Well, we need another organ squared / ASLSP update, no?
Oh, Kensho, what is this you're talking about? Is this the John Cage?
Organ squared as slow as possible is still going on.
Well, thank you for that update. We wouldn't want to leave the segment without acknowledging.
Of course not.
Ass slap.
The ultimate unfinished.
And with that, it's time to move on to our next topic. Kensho, what do you have for us?
With live performance slowly returning to our lives over the next few months, and with various cultural organizations having committed themselves to diversifying their programming, we thought this would be a good moment to take a look at the season offerings that have been announced by some notable musical institutions. So first up, the fall season of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. The season opens with music director Riccardo Muti conducting works by Joseph Bologne, Florence Price, and Ludwig van Beethoven, and it features works by composer-in-residence Jesse Montgomery and performers Leonidas Kavakos, Michael Tilson Thomas, Hilary Hahn, Andres Orozco Estrada, and many others. So, guys, you had some time to kind of look over their offerings. What are some initial reactions that you had about this fall season?
The fact that it's just a fall season. So, I mean, the ultimate acknowledgement that we are still in the times that we are in is that this season, quote unquote, goes through February 6th, which I might mention. The final item on this list right now is the Final Fantasy VII Remake Orchestra World Tour happening on Sunday.
Yeah,
February
unfinished
6th.
from last week's discussion of Olympics and video game music right there.
That's right. But anyway, so, I mean, it's obviously a hedging of sorts, right? To say that, well, things may yet change and or the second half of our season may end up looking quite different from the first, which is a fairly, it's a normal season. There's nothing kind of restrained or COVID-y about it. We've got Vienna Boys Choirs. We've got a big, Handel's Messiah, big choral concerts. We've got, any number of fairly large movie and we've got Beethoven. So this fall season looks normal symphonically.
I guess my curiosity comes from an experience that I don't really have of like a season ticket holder, like a subscriber or someone that is really used to seeing the whole offering for the whole year and kind of planning their life around the concerts, right? So I wonder how this affects subscriptions. How does that work now? Do you just get a subscription for the fall season and then another subscription you renew again for the winter? I wonder what that model is like.
I think that's exactly what they're doing. Yeah. It's going to be subscribing comes in two waves. And I would imagine that might even promote more subscriptions, quite honestly. Because, I mean, it's like, I think that Ludovic Morlot mentioned when he was on this podcast, he was like, yeah, I mean, the subscription model, like, can you really commit to some random Thursday like 8 months from now? Really? Is that the kind of lives that we are leading today? And for some people it is, and it's great. I do want to actually encourage subscribing because it's a way for institutions to have a regular flow of income and to be able to plan and to see what the larger scale reaction of audience of their community is to the kind of programming they're doing. So, I mean, in a perfect world, everybody would subscribe. But, it's just, I think it's less and less tenable in these days. And so I think that even in a non-COVID era, I sort of imagine that an orchestra at some point or another would have tried something like this. But I haven't seen anybody else do this year. Have you guys?
Fall seasons? Yeah, I think it's pretty common now that they're only announcing the fall. And just, again, for those reasons that Tiffany said about just not knowing exactly how it'll all work out. I think the main issue right now is just, if you have artists that are in another country, how do they get in
That's
here?
Right.
With so that's been a big issue for many performing arts institutions even now. I know Santa Fe Opera has had issues with bringing in European singers for their productions as of now. And so, I think those things will continue to happen.
Well, my other thought when looking through this is that, like, for anybody who's worried about like what it means to rebalance or reflect contemporary cultural issues in our programming, like there is some of that. I think that this is a slightly more diverse, slightly more representative season program, but like, come on, you've got whole concerts that are the Mendelssohn Hebrides Overture, the Bruch Violin Concerto, and the Mozart Symphony No. 41. Like, and that's not the only concert like that. So, I mean, I think that there will always be concerts for people who really want nothing but the classical meat and potatoes. Like, you're going to be served still. And maybe there would be some opportunities for you to step out of that box a little bit.
Well, and also just, look at the opening night. Like, I mean, the first program. And can you imagine the program before all of this, that Riccardo Muti would conduct something by, Saint George and Florence Price in the same program? I mean, it signals something at least. So
for my taste, there's not quite enough new music on this season.
Yeah.
And that's a balancing act. I know as well as anybody, like, especially when you're trying to bring to the surface some interesting and underrepresented and just underheard historical curiosities, which, it's like we always find these pieces that it's like, wow, why hasn't anybody heard this? That takes room away from more contemporary voices, but I don't think that there's quite enough contemporary music. And even me, who has very, I would say, somewhat narrow taste in contemporary music, I would like to see more contemporary music on the season.
I also don't see anything massive orchestrationally. I think the biggest thing I see is like Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony. Excuse me, William.
Do you think that's a COVID thing?
Maybe they're balancing it, because I know that orchestras also have done reduced instrumentation with like rotating musicians, so that not everyone plays every week. I don't know if that actually works in terms of the staggering of people that enter the building on a weekly basis, but that also might be the case where they're actually going with reduced forces.
I know this is the sellout option, but I would go to the Rhapsody in Blue and Bolero concert.
Oh yeah, Boleros, that's a big one.
Yeah, and I mean, it has, I don't know why they chose to call it Rhapsody in Blue and Bolero, because it has Ravel's Piano Concerto, which for me is the headliner, but anyway, that's just me.
Yeah, I love Gershwin and Ravel paired. You see that a lot. I mean, that's almost a cliche at this point, but I
like I said, it's the sellout concert.
It never bothers me. There. I'm always happy to hear it.
I'm totally there.
Yeah.
And that's the element too, right? I mean, this is like the first few concerts that they're planning after a year's worth of not having any ticket sales. So obviously the kind of white bread vanilla themed concerts are really geared toward that, right?
That's right.
Cool. Well, that wraps up this review of Chicago Symphony's season. Listeners, I'm particularly curious about if you are a subscriber and are now dealing with fall season as opposed to spring season. How does that impact your choices and getting a subscription, or just going individual tickets? We would love to know. So please write us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com.
Yeah, and tell us if there are any other musical institutions who you'd like us to take a look at their season. This is kind of a fun thing to do.
All right, moving on. Tiffany, what do you have for us?
On July 24th, 2021, at this year's Tanglewood Music Festival, the Boston Symphony Orchestra and violinist Anna-Sophie Mutter premiered the second violin concerto of none other than John Williams, acclaimed composer renowned for silver screen movie scores the like of Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, and countless others. The premiere was conducted by the composer himself. Let's hear a clip. We here at the Gabfest were fascinated by the prospect of listening to this work, a 4-movement concerto with multiple cadenzas, so we decided to have a group listen. Fortunately, the performance is available in full on YouTube, which we'll link in the show notes. So, Will, Kensho, what did you guys think? Instant classic, movie composer's version of classical violin repertoire format? Did it take off or did it fall flat?
I would put this much closer to the instant classic category than the composer's version of classic violin repertoire. I mean, this did not, sound to me like Schindler's List or something like that. This sounded like a very serious...
It sounded like 20th century
modern
classical composition.
Violin
right?
concerto handled by somebody who really knows how to write music, knows how to write for the violin, knows how to write for the orchestra. I mean, I don't know if instant classic comes to mind because I think this is probably a little crunchier than the kind of thing that would, immediately ingratiate itself to every audience. But I think that if you're somebody who likes the Korngold Concerto or the Szymanowski concertos or Prokofiev, like, this would be right up your alley.
Frankly, or even like Bartók.
Yeah, or even Bartók. This is the words I would say are like modern masterpiece. I've listened to it a few times, and I can't say that I've quite got my head around the full structure of it, but it's a very compelling listen every time I've listened to it. So I was hugely impressed by it.
It reminds me of like early John Williams, right? Like his first essay. Have you heard that piece? Which is like very 12-tony. It has nothing to do with the movie music at all. And it kind of is harking back to that. That's what it reminds me of.
That was a question I had for you guys. How familiar are you guys with John Williams' non-film oeuvre? Because there's a lot. I mean, he's written concertos for almost every instrument, I would say.
I know the tuba concerto, which is a little bit more cinematic than this, for sure. This is the second violin concerto, right? I think I know the first violin concerto. I've heard James Ennis, I think, played it a while ago.
Yeah, I believe that was very early in John Williams' career, the first, and I'm not very familiar with it.
Yeah, but this is definitely, like you say, a little bit crunchier than what we know John Williams to compose, at least lately.
What'd you make of it, Tiff?
Yeah, I enjoy. I mean, again, it's written in the 21st century kind of classical composition language, and not the language of the silver screen necessarily. So for anyone who has dismissed John Williams as somebody who is full of cheap tricks and steals from himself and
steals from others
and is derivative, I don't know. I mean, have a listen to this, because I think it goes a pretty long way in countering that argument. Of course, with a lot of composers that you don't know, you end up trying to hear bits and pieces of other composers. And so what I was hearing was like bits and pieces of, like we've already said, Bartók, and quite a bit of Prokofiev in there, and then a couple of Korngold, Waxman, these kind of other cinematic composers who did do a lot of art music proper.
Yeah, but I would never call this piece derivative. I mean, I think that it was building on those things in a very profitable way.
I'm also surprised, was there a lot of press around this? Because it's not like it was widely celebrated. I don't know if that's just because now I'm not in the country anymore, or it was not something that I saw at all as like, oh, like this is happening. This is a Tanglewood, right? So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The only build-up that I can find, or not really even build-up, but discussion of what happened prior to the premiere itself is in this review, which says that it took him the last year. So it was more or less a COVID pandemic project for them, but that the two of them, which is to say Williams and Mutter, have several years of concertizing and recording together. So they have a pretty robust history collaborating.
Yeah, I think that was apparent in just that, like, this seemed written for her. I mean, she was so in command of it. And she really, I mean, she's in command of everything she plays. She's amazing. But it just seemed to speak. And I don't know, I just thought it was incredibly well written for the violin. I mean, it's hard to write a piece that's virtuosic and still musical,
right?
I mean, unfinished segments, Paganini Caprices, right? So, this was not flash for flash sake, but it certainly was not easy listening or easily playing. I mean, this is a serious piece of music.
And it looks like it's memorized.
No, I think she had the music.
Does it?
Yeah, she had the music because you can tell because she was wearing her glasses, which is, we got to talk at least a little bit about her look. Because, I mean, her look is amazing in this. She's wearing this, like, canary yellow dress.
Off the shoulder.
Or
not
right.
off the shoulder, like shoulderless.
She's got the
mermaid
full
dress
blowout going on, with like the highlights and everything. And then she's got these very serious glasses going on. I love it. It's amazing.
The other thing I noticed watching the video of this is that the harp is placed very prominently. It's actually placed more or less like not quite opposite Anna Sophie, but in the orchestra, maybe like where you would think the violas in front of the conductor.
Scottish fantasy kind of placement.
Right, yeah. So it does have quite a prominent part placed for it. And then, of course, the other thing that I'm watching in this performance is just like the way of John Williams' conducting, which is so interesting.
It's kind of dopey, wouldn't you say?
I don't know. As trained conductors, the three of us, there's like any number of like technical things that we notice when people who are not career conductors, which by this point, frankly, John Williams is kind of a career conductor anyway, but let's put that aside. That's not his, bread and butter trade. But let's put aside the technical aspects. There's something of a confidence that only somebody who has had the baton just like placed in their hands and been put in front of a magnificent orchestra can have in terms of their relaxation and their sort of faith that what they want will happen. Because there's a couple climaxes in here where like he's as relaxed as can be, like I'm looking at his elbow and like the way that there's no tension in his arm, and he's like got his mouth open and he's raising it, and like the orchestra is just like giving him this unbelievable crescendo, and he's literally as relaxed as can be, and to end it he just lets his arm fall and it's like the sound that he's able to get in terms of the shaping of the crescendo is everything that you want to be able to get when you're exerting like 50 times more effort as a trained conductor. So, I don't know, it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's really cool to see that. I mean, just because of who he is and the iconic music that he has produced.
Right.
There's just such a respect. And it's like nobody is going to show up sight reading to the premiere of John Williams' second violin concerto with Anna Sophie Mutter. I mean, it's just like you're going to come prepared. You're going to play the hell out of it and really make music.
And I imagine the musicians had much, unless they also knew his oeuvre outside of his film music, they probably also had much the same reaction, which is to come in being like, okay, let's see what this is like, and then to be kind of, is it insulting to say pleasantly surprised? I mean, like, it's really, it has all the detail and all the orchestration and all the color of a really sophisticated symphonic composition artist, which John Williams is, of course. We know him to be able to deploy all those things very, very well in the service of movies, but it's fun to see that it stands independent, that he stands independent of that as well.
Another piece that this kind of struck me as maybe being slightly in the vein of is the Bernstein, the Serenade, even though that's strings, percussion, and violin. But that's kind of a naughty piece, Knotty piece for Bernstein. You understand why I had to clarify that with him. But I think that there's something in that tradition here as well.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because I guess it's the third movement where there's like this extensive like duet with timpani and the solo, which is very much kind of like that percussion violin vibe that the Serenade kind of goes with. So yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and if people are interested in that kind of a moment, I would strongly recommend checking out Gidon Kramer's recording of the Beethoven Violin Concerto, where he's playing the cadenzas composed by Alfred Schnittke, which are extensive duets between the timpani and the solo violinists. They're amazing.
Well, now we're completely off track.
Well, have a listen. Let us know what you think. That does it for our final segment of the day. Let's go to Will for our classical mixtape.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Kensho, what do you have this week?
So, in kind of surveying the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's fall season, I came across a piece that I did not know and did not even recognize the composer. And so I took a listen, and it's quite a beautiful piece. This is La Nuit et l'amour by Augusta Holmès, written in 1888. And it reminded me actually of another piece that's on the season, which is the Yacht of Enchanted Lakes. It's kind of got that like really calm, atmospheric concert opener kind of vibe to it. And so yeah, it's a nice, easy listen, let's say. And this particular performance is by the Staatsphilharmonie Rheinland-Pfalz with Patrick Davin conducting.
Great. What a sweet suggestion from a sweet boy. Thank you, Kensho.
Die now, please.
Tiffany, what do you have for the mixtape this week?
This week I have a tone poem by César Franck. Help me and pronounce the French, Will.
You should ask Kensho. He is a Frenchman now.
Oh, yes. Okay, Kensho. Here is your inaugural pronunciation.
Ce qu'on entend sur la montagne.
What You Hear on the Mountain, which is a symphonic poem after Victor Hugo, written in 1846. This is Brian Priestman and the Orchestre Symphonique de la... What the hell does RTBF stand for?
RTBF.
Thank you. I don't know what I was trying to find. I was just like YouTube surfing, and I came across this. It's not published. Like I think there's like a ratty old kind of manuscript score on IMSLP, and I just was like very struck by the opening and like the kind of these like faded in and out harmonics that come in and out. He was an organist, and this is as close as I can think of to an orchestra being an organ, frankly, as an example I've ever heard in the repertoire.
It's like pre-Rheingold.
Yes.
At the very beginning.
Yeah, it's very primordial in that way.
Very cool. I can't wait to listen to the whole thing. It's certainly not a piece I've ever heard of or heard before, but that's a very compelling case you make for it here. Well, I'm going to do an emergency swap for my mixtape recommendation. I was going to recommend Bach because I did a fantastic cantata BWV 140 on my concert yesterday, but I've got to recommend the Alfred Schnittke Cadenza to the Beethoven Violin Concerto.
Does it go through like a number of violin concertos like that, or no?
Yeah.
I bet the transition back to the tutti is just hilarious. I can't wait.
You'll find the links to all these and to our full classical mixtape playlist in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm Kensho Watanabe, and on behalf of Tiffany Liu and William White, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We'd also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week.